Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Capetta, the manager of collection and exhibition programs at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program. While other guests are joining us, use this time to familiarize yourself with the chat interface. To join the chat, just enter your name, or really any name that you prefer, and click to agree to the terms of service and the privacy policy. We encourage you to use the chat to ask questions during the program at any time. They'll be addressed in the last portion of today's program. If you like, you can let us know where from where you're joining us. It's always wonderful to see how far and wide our reach is because we're virtual. If you have any trouble hearing, make sure that the volume on your device is turned up and the video is unmuted. You can find the volume control to the right of the video's play bar. The color blue, and there are a series of blue rectangles, indicates the volume level. If the video for some reason stops playing, just refresh your browser window and ensure the video is not paused by pressing the triangular play button. If you hear an echo, make sure the video is only playing in one tab on your device. If it's playing in multiple locations, you might hear an echo. And if you have any other questions or issues, you can always contact us at virtualevents@clevelandart.org. Below the screen is a list of resources that relate to this afternoon's program. Take a look now or later. And lastly, this program is being recorded, so you can watch it later on the CMA website. I already saw some questions around that, so it's always great to hear that this resource will be available. Now I would like to welcome Heather Lamonides Brown, who's the Virginia N. and Randall J. Barbado Deputy Director and Chief Curator of the Cleveland Museum of Art, who will introduce this afternoon's program. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the annual Dr. Ranajit K. Datta Lecture, which brings nationally and internationally recognized experts in the fields of art history and archaeology to discuss new scholarship, museum exhibitions, and archaeological discoveries in Indian art. This year, Charlotte Schmidt, Director d'études l'École Française d'Extrême Orient, will present How Krishna Became Vishnu, Early Images of Krishna in India. The lecture is organized in tandem with the groundbreaking exhibition Revealing Krishna, Journey to Cambodia's Sacred Mountain, which presents the story, context, and new restoration of the CMA's 1,500-year-old stone sculpture from Cambodia called Krishna Lifting Mount Govardhana. I'm standing in today for our director, Bill Griswold, who is currently traveling on museum business. On behalf of Bill and the staff of the CMA, I want to express the museum's deep appreciation for the extraordinary generosity of the Datta family in supporting this lecture and the enduring presence of scholarship on Indian art at the CMA. And now I would like to introduce Sonia Ree Mace, the George P. Bickford Curator of Indian and Southeast Asian Art and our Curator of Krishna. In her 10-year tenure at the CMA, Sonia has curated numerous exhibitions, including Art and Stories from Mughal India in 2016, which was accompanied by a marvelous and deeply researched publication that focused on the major acquisition of Mughal and Deccan paintings from the Catherine Glynn Benkheim and Ralph Benkheim collection. The following year, Sonia curated the exhibition Beyond Angkor, Cambodian Sculpture from Bante Chamar, which featured the unprecedented loan of the bas-relief from a temple enclosure wall from the 13th century from the National Museum of Cambodia, which resulted from the signing of a cultural cooperation agreement with the Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts of the Kingdom of Cambodia. Sonia continues to lecture and publish regularly on her ongoing research, which most recently focuses on depictions of nuns and women's fertility rites in early Buddhist relief sculptures of India. We look forward to Sonia's future projects. Charlotte Schmidt's lecture today honors the memory of Dr. Ranajit K. Datta and his wonderful legacy at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And now Sonia will introduce today's speaker, Charlotte Schmidt.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the 5th annual Ranajit K. Datta Distinguished Lecture in Indian Art, made possible by the Dr. Ranajit K. Datta in memory of Kiran P. and S.C. Datta Endowment Fund. On behalf of all of us at the Cleveland Museum of Art, we are delighted to welcome Charlotte Schmidt from the French School of Asian Studies, the EFEO in Paris, as our speaker today. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to first take a moment to pay special tribute to the man who made today's lecture series possible. Only last month, Dr. Ranajit K. Datta, or Ran, as his friends called him, passed away after years of valiantly coping with Parkinson's disease. Born in Bengal before the partition of India demarcated his ancestral home as belonging to East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, Ran settled in Kolkata, where he attended the Presidency College and first met Stan Schuma, a student of Indian art history from Poland, who would later become the first curator of Indian and Southeast Asian art at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Ran moved to the United States in 1958 to attend graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, after which he moved to Cleveland to begin a 30-year career as a scientist, specializing in crystallography in the lighting division of General Electric, where he developed and patented daytime traffic light technology still in use today. This is a marvelous photo from 1978 when Ran met Mother Teresa on her visit to John Carroll University here in University Heights. In 1985, during the landmark exhibition of Kushan sculpture curated by Stan Schuma on the occasion of the Festival of India, Ran was a powerful connector between the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Indian community, such that the Federation of Indian Community Associations of Northeast Ohio conferred on CMA the annual Friend of India Award, thanks largely to Ran's advocacy. Ran was an active member of the Indian community, a founder of the Bengali Cultural Society of Cleveland, and passionate about sharing Indian culture at the museum during his nearly 3 decades as a docent. In 2016, the museum hosted the first annual Dr. Ranajit K. Datta Distinguished Lecture in Indian Art, in conjunction with the exhibition Mughal India, Art and Stories. Ran, who had been an avid collector of 18th century English silver, sold his beloved collection to fund the lecture series in honor of his parents. Because of his generous endowment, the Cleveland Museum of Art is able to host leading scholars from anywhere in the world on any topic of the Indian and Southeast Asian art curators' choosing to come to Cleveland and share their knowledge with the community. Here we have Mughal painting luminary Ashok Das, who traveled with his wife from Kolkata to present his research on the master artist Basavan. Every year since then, we've been able to host scholars on wide-ranging topics. Robert L. Brown from UCLA spoke on the imagery of the Bodhisattva of Compassion of Avalokiteshvara from India to Southeast Asia in connection with the 2017 exhibition Beyond Angkor, Cambodian Sculpture from Bande Chmar. In 2018, Anupam Saha, at the left, leading conservator from the CSMVS in Mumbai, spoke on new developments in our understanding of Indian pigments, material science being of special interest to Ran. In this photo, we see at the right Ran's nephew, Ashim, and Marjorie Williams from CMA's philanthropy department, whose dedication to seeing Ran's vision for an endowment fund truly made it possible. The last Datta lecture before today's event was delivered by Professor Deborah Klimberg-Salter, who came to us from the University of Vienna. She spoke to us about her exciting new work on metallurgy and Hindu Shahi art, pertaining especially to the museum's breathtaking raitan of the goddess Durga in Ran's favorite medium of silver. Please be sure to see it on display in our ancient Near Eastern galleries. As at every Datta lecture, when we introduce Ran to the audience, everyone is moved to resounding applause, since his decision to establish the endowment fund is an act of generosity that honors his parents and enriches our community in Cleveland and the scholarly world far beyond. I wish we could all be together in Gartner Auditorium so that he could hear us now. We continue to honor his legacy by bringing speakers to Cleveland who have unique insights on aspects of the museum's collection. Today's distinguished speaker is Dr. Charlotte Schmidt, Director of Studies and Chief Editor at the French School of Asian Studies, the EFEO, in Paris. She will be presenting her groundbreaking research on the history of Krishna images in India leading up to the form of Krishna lifting Mount Govardhana from Cambodia that forms the centerpiece of the Revealing Krishna exhibition, now on view in the Kelvin and Eleanor Smith Exhibition Hall downstairs. This is a topic that is close to my heart, not only because of my curatorial work on the Cleveland Krishna, but also because the story takes us back to Mathura, the city in northern India where Krishna of the texts was born, and whose ancient sculptural traditions formed the focus of my own doctoral research. Charlotte completed her PhD under the supervision of Gérard Fussman at the Collège de France in Paris, in which she focused on the surprising earliest surviving images of Krishna from Mathura. She then went on to join the membership of the French School of Asian Studies, the EFEO, in 2003, posted in both Paris and Pondicherry in Tamil Nadu in the south of India. There is no one better worldwide to explain the development of Krishna in art leading up to the time when the Cleveland Krishna was made, to contextualize the monumental shift in depictions that took place between the 5th and 7th centuries, when art, people, texts, and ideas circulated potently between India and Southeast Asia. Her publications on the topic are essential tomes for the field, especially this volume, Le Don de Voir, or The Gift of Seeing, the first Krishna representations from the region of Mathura that is always within arm's reach at my desk. A prolific scholar, Charlotte has authored numerous publications on aspects of Krishna devotion in literature and images. She has untangled the complex networks of transmissions of stories and images as they were received and reinterpreted, even between different regions of India. My pleasure in introducing Charlotte to you all today could only be amplified if she were here with us all in person, but we are sincerely honored that she has agreed to join us from Paris virtually today. She is here with us live, but her lecture has been recorded to avoid any international connectivity issues during the presentation. At any time, please feel free to type in questions in the chat section, and she will take them at the end of the talk. Now, thanks to the generosity of Dr. Ranajit K. Datta, I give you Charlotte Schmidt.
How Krishna became Vishnu. Today I will speak about the contribution of the iconography to our understanding of the development of Hinduism. This lecture will be about the way the early depictions of a deity mainly called Krishna, but also known in ancient times as Vasudeva, how these carvings were transformed to represent Vishnu, or one of the main deities of the Hinduism. To speak about iconography in ancient India, we use three types of data. We use material culture. I will mainly speak of stone carvings, but also of coins, as you will see. I also need to refer to inscriptions. Being text engraved on enduring materials, inscriptions constitute a data which is intermediary between material culture and texts. And we will speak of texts. We will speak of Vedic text from the 2nd millennium BC up to what are called the Puranas, composed from the 4th or 5th century AD, even if the epics, the Mahabharata and the Harivamsha, will be our main focus. And these were composed between the 4th BC and the 4th AD. The main idea of this lecture is to show how the sculptured tradition of the carvings helps us to better understand the texts, the way they were done and constantly reshaped, recomposed to suit the needs of the devotees. We will survey a large span of time, as we will start from 1000 BC to reach the 7th century, and we will survey a very broad territory starting in Central Asia and in the north of India to reach the south of India and beyond to go to Cambodia, as we will speak of the first images of Krishna produced in these two areas, southwest of India and Cambodia, when the iconography of Krishna has reached them, probably in the 7th century. To make visible the changes that have occurred, first we need to present the two deities that are referred in the title of this lecture. Firstly, who is Krishna? In Indian text, Krishna is a dark one, a deity known all over the Indian peninsula from north, where he appears in the most ancient documents today available from the 4th BC approximately. His name of Krishna means dark, and I've quoted here a text in Tamil which plays on the color of the god to make appear all the bright nuances of his darkness. Dark one, immaculate red feet that cut the course of the rebirth cycle. Dark one who has the appearance and the luster of a gem. In secondary literature for scholars, Krishna has been considered from various angles, some of which also play on the color of this god, to consider he would be a popular one, worshipped by a huge mass of people, a kind of god of origins or even an aboriginal deity. His appearance in the Vedas being controversial at best. Thus, we deal with the black one, Krishna, a deity also known as Vasudeva, the deity of riches, a deity who is the god of the Mahabharata, a deity who was the first represented with 4 arms in the Indian peninsula, a deity first represented as holding a mace, a disc and a conch, and a deity who is one form of Vishnu. Then, who is Vishnu? Vishnu appears early, as this is the name given to a Vedic deity. Vishnu is not a prominent deity of Vedic literature, yet in the Vedic hymns he has specific characteristics. He takes a giant form to cover the entire space with his steps, the strides of Vishnu, often 3 in number. And this is one deity who helps Indra, who is the Vedic king of gods. For instance, to show you how Vishnu acts in the Veda, here is one of the most famous verses about him, where an antique seer says, "I will now proclaim the heroic deeds of Vishnu, the one who has measured out the terrestrial regions, who established the higher abode, having white paste stretched out triply." To follow Vishnu, we need also the later text and the iconography. The traditions of representations in carving, where this deity takes many forms. From the Puranas, in texts, that is from the 4th century, this diversity in forms is known as his avataras or descents, manifestations of Vishnu. They are called pradurбhavas in the earlier epics. In contemporary India and since approximately the Gupta period, which lasted from the 4th to the 6th century, the most common iconography of Vishnu is the one of a 4-armed deity holding a mace, a disc, a conch, and sometimes a flower. Or the ones that you can now see at the center of this slide as a form of reference for the circle of his avataras all around him. Vishnu has a blue complexion, blue being a common nuance of darkness. To say it in other words, the most common appearance of Vishnu is the same as the earliest one used to represent his most celebrated manifestation, Krishna. This iconographic ambiguity emerged within the Gupta age, a period during which were expanded experiments of the previous one, the Kushana period, named after the Kushanas, who dominated the northwestern part of what became later the Gupta Empire. From Kushana age to Gupta period, here are 2 deities with multiple arms who hold the same characteristic attributes, but one is a form of the other. To better understand how much these gods share, how they came to have so many common points, but also how they can be distinguished one from the other, it is necessary to have a look at the history of the representations of the 2 deities, and then at the historiography, the study of these representations. Both enable to get a clearer picture. First, the history of iconography. It starts in the northern regions, in what is called the Greek Bactria, so more something like Central Asia, with one of the colonies that were established in this part of the world after the campaigns of Alexander the Great. In one of these colonies, called Iranum, and situated in the Afghanistan of today, coins presenting the first known iconography of Krishna were discovered. These are Indo-Greek coins that are bilingual in Greek on the obverse, Greek written with Greek alphabet, and on the reverse, Prakrit, so an Indian language written with the Brahmi script, that is one of the scripts that was then used. These coins are dated of 180 BC approximately. The characteristic objects that are held by the two figures here allow for their identification because these objects are mentioned in the Mahabharata, in the epic. Here are Balarama, the elder brother of Krishna, and Krishna himself. This iconography is very singular as it seems a product of a kind of crucible where Greek, Indian, and Central Asian elements are visible. Here you can see them very clearly, I hope so. The analysis of the iconography which is used on these coins, their bilingual nature, the numismatic context allow for understanding several points. The figures here do not follow an already existing iconography, but they are an original creation of the artists that have imagined the deities on these coins. Krishna and his brother, we also learned, were very important Indian deities for foreign kings. And finally, represented on the verse of the coin, the elder brother, Kushana or Balarama, seems being more important than Krishna himself. These coins have a kind of counterpart in India itself, a column that was erected in central India in honor of Vasudeva by somebody who can be defined as a Greek ambassador. This column has been dated around 150 BC. It is engraved with an inscription that records that a devotee of Vasudeva called Heliodoros, a Greek, claiming that he is the envoy of Antiochus, an Indo-Greek king, has commissioned this column that was topped by one Garuda, the mount of the god Vasudeva, and thus presumably a way of representing this god of whom Heliodoros says he is one devotee. So, how Krishna started to be represented in India under human shape? After these rare experiments, and probably a few others, which demonstrate how much the beginnings of the iconography of this god, and more broadly speaking, in fact, of Vaishnava deities, can be located in the area of Mathura to the south of the modern Delhi. It is there that was found a certain amount of stone carvings dated between the 1st and the 3rd century AD, approximately. And in these carvings, Krishna can be recognized. The number of this type of carvings is the main reason why it is considered the first iconography of Krishna has begun in Mathura. Five of the Kushanas, people from Central Asia, or maybe beyond it, who have settled in Greek Bactria and for whom Mathura was a kind of southern capital, a capital city of the south. There are also representations of two-armed figure with only two arms, to which we will revert. And you can see that this figure is represented as fighting against an animal, which is a horse. These are not. You can also see in this picture that many of these carvings are not impressive. They are very worn out. They are of small dimensions, and then they were also first considered as representation of Vishnu. This deity with four arms can be represented alone, and this is the most the representations which are the most numerous. And he can also be represented in the company of other beings, like here. You see he's here in the company alongside with other important deities of this time, including one Ardharanarishvara, one Shiva who is half male and half female, and here in the company of two other members of his family, and here as an assistant, as an attendant to a giant figure, an eminat. What allows to recognize Krishna in this four-armed deity with a discus and a mace? We rely here on the testimony of a major text, the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna, the devotee of Krishna, says, "With the tiara, the mace, and the discs, such a mass of fire that projects flames on all sides, I see you. You who are so difficult to see, huge and spreading the glow of a burning blaze of the sun itself in all directions. In front of such incredible vision, I shiver, and my mind is shaken by fear. Show me your form of God only. Do me this favor, O Lord of the gods, support of the universe. I want to see you again, under your ordinary form, with the tiara, the mace, and the discs. Take this four-armed form, O Lord of thousand arms of infinite shape." In this passage, Arjuna is longing for seeing the god under what he calls his ordinary form, with four arms, wearing a tiara, holding a mace and a discus. Such description matches with the small carvings made in the area of Mathura during the Kushana period. It seems that with these carvings, craftsmen, artisans and sponsors were faced with a challenge. To say it with Arjuna, how to see what cannot be seen, how to represent what is impossible to see with one human eye. Arjuna and Krishna provide the answer. Krishna gives a divine eye to Arjuna, what could also be called a devotional eye. "As you are not able to see me with your own eye, I give you a divine eye. Look at me, supreme magic." We learn that there is a divine eye and a human one. And stone images are what allow to shift from one to the other. They are a bridge between the two worlds, the human world and the divine one. Depictions in this material world are one help to envision a deity who cannot be seen with human eyes. The first stone images presenting the ordinary form of the god allow for seeing what cannot be seen. From the Kushana period, there are several ways of representing this deity, and from the following one, the Gupta period, other more sophisticated ways appear. But all the Gupta period images are based on the representation of the Kushana period. This is a representation of the Gupta period, more sophisticated one, of course, than this small image, but this one could not have been done without this one as a base. Here is this beautiful Gupta period image with three main heads and many other beings participating to the representation, and this is based on the representations of the Kushana period. When you see such image, you can hesitate to identify the main figure as one Vishnu or as one Shiva. We can wonder, this is an extraordinary vision of the deity, of course, but is he a Krishna or is he a Vishnu? A classical identification is the one of Vishnu. Nevertheless, he could well be a presentation of the Krishna part of Vishnu, the Avatara part of Vishnu, represented with two other main of his avatars, the lion one and the boar one. To identify such image as one Vishnu or as one Krishna or as an ambiguous form, we have to survey the historiography of the identification of these two deities in material culture. As we have already mentioned, in the history of the study of the images, the representations of Krishna made during the Kushana period were first identified as representations of Vishnu himself. It took time before they were recognized as images of Krishna, and after all, you could say there is not much difference. To consider this first image as representations of Vishnu is just a retrospective way of saying the things, and even if ahistorical, a perfectly understandable way. Because these not so impressive representations of one four-armed deity were found during the first half of the 20th century. And then they were identified from the classical iconography of Vishnu that is in force from the Gupta period. You start with a representation of Vishnu done from the 4th, 6th century, and you go back in time to the Kushana period, when the first iconography of Krishna and Vishnu appeared, at a time when the relations between these two deities was different of what they became within the Gupta age. The thing is that in the area of Mathura during the Kushana period, some of the stone carvings, these ones, the triads, very worn out and not impressive at all, for sure. These stone carvings cannot but be representations of Krishna as a specific deity that is not the Vishnu who started to be represented from the Gupta period. On the triad we have already presented, in fact, we see two male deity with 4 arms. One of them, this one, is Balarama. In the center, the female figure is a sister of Vasudeva Krishna and of Balarama, also called Sankarsana in the Arivamsha. This prequel to the Mahabharata that was composed in the Kushana period in the region of Mathura. On other triads of Jain affiliation, a pair of attendants is represented. One of them is a snake deity. This snake deity is Balarama, and the other attendant then can be identified as a Krishna. These two, Balarama and Krishna, are said to be the cousins of the Jain master Neminath, who lived in Mathura in the Jain text. You can wonder who is this Balarama, also called Sankarsana, who appeared on the coins of Iranum as an important deity. Balarama is the elder brother. He is one of the obverse of the coin found at Iranu, but he is also an important deity in central India and in the area of Mathura from the 1st BC up to the 3rd AD approximately, till in fact Vishnu started to be represented with this early iconography of Krishna. Gold statues of impressive dimension of Balarama are known from a large area in Mathura region, but also in central and north India. The small number and the condition of the triads explain why, in a first stage, they were not taken into account to identify the 4-armed being, this one, holding a mace and discus. This one, you see how much it corresponds to the iconography of the coins of Iranu. But in these small, rare and damaged triads, the 4-armed deity holding a discus and a mace cannot be but one member of a Frishni family, the brother of Balarama and of his sister. These statues of Krishna reminds of the coins found at Iranum, where Balarama is represented as the most important deity of the pair. During the Kushana period, there are also other carvings that can be linked to Vasudeva Krishna and were found in the area of Mathura. There are unique or rare representations. Several carvings representing a deity with 8 arms who strides. One representation of a fantastic being with an animal head, which is supposed to be a boar head, as we will see. What is called the Chaturvyuha emanation figure, the usual 4-armed being is represented here with bodies emerging from him, and one of these bodies is the one of a snake deity, Balarama. By comparison with what is said in the Mahabharata, amongst other texts, and by comparison with later carvings, these 3 types of relief can be identified as representations of the Vedic Vishnu on the one hand, as one representation of an ancestor of the boar manifestation of Vishnu who rescues the earth on the other, and a representation of the creative power of a god still linked to his family members, but having taken a more important position than the one who is his elder brother in mythology. This slide that you can see now, I have designed to show the different shapes taken by the multiple gods that belongs to a Vaishnava obedience during the Kushana period. You have the 4-armed Krishna, by far the most commonly encountered one, but maybe the less impressive from a material culture point of view. You have the god who strides, you have the god with a boar head, you have the Chaturvya figure, and you have the deity fighting against a horse. All these representations with multiple arms appear as experiments. They have iconographic descendants, but these are either slightly different or rather different than their ancestors. If you replace them in the context of the Kushana period, these are representations that entertain a link with Krishna, but if you consider them from a later perspective, all, including the representations of Krishna, appear as experiments that allow for the figure of Vishnu to emerge. So, how to account for a distinction between Krishna and Vishnu? What is the difference? Does it rely solely on the already considered triads? Not so many carvings, not very impressive. How could have been also considered the earliest carvings, these ones, once the same iconography started to be used to depict Vishnu from the Gupta period? To propose answer, we have now to speak a little about this specific fight of Krishna, the one led against the demonic horse named Keshin from the Arivamsha. During the Kushana period, in fact, only one of the fights that are represented from the Gupta period as specific battles fought by Krishna, only one of them has been carved, and this is a fight against a horse. Texts also express the specific status of this fight. First, a fight of Krishna against a demon called Keshin is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. Second, we learn through the Arivamsha that this is a fight led against a man-eating horse. The story as it is told in this text has been modeled after the horse sacrifice of Vedic tradition. That is a sacrifice allowing a king to become a Chakravartin, a king of the universe. The horse represents the sun rolling over the whole earth like a horse wandering over terrestrial kingdoms. Thus, once again, a Vedic background that can already be noticed in the representation of an eight-armed striding deity and the boar-headed one can be pointed out. Portraying a two-armed hero fighting with bare hands is really remarkable in these representations, found on strange objects which could have been weightlifts or just kind of trophies offered to wrestlers, because on the reverse of these objects, wrestlers are often depicted, and in the Arivamsha, Krishna is said to be a very victorious wrestler, the one who kills a demonic uncle, Kamsa. To recapitulate, during the Kushana period in Mathura, several experiments gravitate around two deities who are mythological brothers. As on the underground coins where he is represented on the obverse, the elder of the Vrishnis, Balarama, may well have been more important at that time, or sometimes more important than his younger brother Krishna. Of course, other interpretations are possible. Sorry. The two brothers may be two different visible forms of one supreme deity or a nucleus of the later Avatara theory of Vaishnavism, according to which the supreme god takes different visible forms in different circumstances. At that time, indeed, the most commonly encountered representation of a multiple-armed deity is the one of a four-armed being, standing in a static way and presenting the viewer a club, a discus, and a conch. In the Bharata, this is the ordinary form of the god called Vasudeva or Krishna by his ideal devotee Arjuna. Other multiple-armed deities are encountered who express a Vedic background and an active aspect that links them one to the other, while the multiplicity of their arms and the weapons or other attributes they hold invites them to associate them to the static four-armed deity. With the 4th and the 5th century, important changes in the iconography of this deity occurred. The supplementary arms of this god are lifted down. The attributes often take an anthropomorphic form and a halo emerge. These elements are never seen during the Kushana period, and they accompany the emergence of new images. We get new images of, for instance, a god holding always a mace and a conch, but now lying on a snake deity. And this is an image of a creative aspect of the god. We get other forms provided with animal heads, like a lion head or a horse head. We get these three-headed deities also, where the lion head comes and the boar head is added also to a central figure with the halo and the attributes who have been lifted down. Such form, with its variants implying creative aspects, seems to have been designed in order to show the association between all these forms, to express that you have to associate all these forms to recognize that all these forms are from a unique deity. New images are not the only difference that is noticeable. There is a big difference in scale. The representations are now of much more impressive dimensions. From a usual 30 centimeters of height for stelas during the Kushana period, we get now images of 1, 2, or even 3 meters, statues made during the Gupta period. And these carvings are spread in a much larger territory, extending further in the east and further in the west. Thirdly, there is a difference then in the relations established between the different forms already known, like the deity having the female on his shoulder, the god who strides, and the four-armed deity holding a conch and a discus. The attributes all these forms hold are now exactly the same as to show their links. Some of these forms are also found in archaeological associations in sites where they are paired. And you have these carvings with the human head associated with animal ones, delineated on the halo that has emerged, and that clearly indicate a link between the four-armed deity and the form having animal heads, like the boar form, or that was already known, or with the lion form that appeared now. These representations of the omniform express the link between the animal-headed forms and the human-headed one. Changes in the iconography of the four-armed deity, in the size of the carvings, in the dimensions of the territory where they are found, are signs of deep changes within the circle where Krishna used to be the supreme deity. All these changes can be connected with the appearance of the Hindu Vishnu, of whom Krishna became one form only among others because of different types of text and because of another iconographical phenomenon. First, text. The Arivamsha, the supplement to the Mahabharata, is composed at that time, between the 1st and the 3rd century, in the region of Mathura. In this prequel of the Mahabharata, it is told what has happened before the events told in the Mahabharata, and the status of the god of the Mahabharata is entirely reshaped to make of him one form of Vishnu who is born on earth, raised in a cowherd camp, and grows till he becomes an adult deity, the one of the Mahabharata. Secondly, we have to speak about inscriptions. In the same territory than this one, where the carvings we have just shown of Vishnu appear under several. Vishnu also appears under several names in the inscriptions. The inscriptions reinforce the status of Vishnu that is expressed in the Arivamsha and in the carvings. Vishnu is shown as the source of other deities, the reference form from which all other forms now derive. Thirdly, and this is very important for us, there is a new iconography that appeared for the god Krishna. The iconography of Krishna as one child fighting against powerful deities with only 2 arms and with bare hands. To understand it, this new iconographical phenomenon, we need to speak a little about the Arivamsha. What is the Harivamsha? The Harivamsha can be defined as the Hari lineage. It tells so what happens when Krishna was born on earth, how he was born, etc. In this text, a list of manifestations is given where numerous forms, including the boar and the lion ones, for instance, appear. These are not yet called avatars, they are just pradobhavas, manifestation of the deity, a term already encountered in the Mahabharata. But Krishna is just, I would say, one of the names of this list, even if, at the same time, he is the main hero, and a hero whose main exploit is to lift the Govardhana mountain. But how to link these two deities, Krishna and Vishnu, who are so similar, and in the same time, how to make them distinct? In the Harivamsha, they use a very clever means for that. They found something very clever, I think. And this is what I've called the biological model. In the Harivamsha, a biological model, in fact, is used to account for the relation between Krishna and Vishnu. The child form is Krishna and the adult form is Vishnu, or a kind of Krishna-Vishnu who remains ambiguous. You can also say that the child is Vishnu when he was a child, and you can say that the adult is Krishna when he was an adult. And this kind of Krishna-Vishnu who remains ambiguous can be represented as such, for instance, when one episode of the Mahabharata, like on these two carvings you can see here, is carved. In these carvings, in fact, Vishnu, Krishna is a kind of viewer himself. He's not an active form. He's just looking at something. He's in fact watching the fight of Bhima, one of the Pandavas, against a king called Jarasandha. So we get a Vishnu who is not active, but who is included into a narrative scene, and who is an adult deity presenting 4 arms and the usual attributes of Vishnu, because these are images from the Gupta period, but in the same time this is an ambiguous form. It's just a kind of adult form of Krishna. So, how to follow this biological model? So, following this biological model, you get supplementary arms to appear when the Krishna of the Harivamsha becomes an adult. That is when Krishna becomes the god of the Mahabharata, or if you follow the Harivamsha perspective, when Krishna becomes Vishnu. Here is the vision given in the Harivamsha, which is rather a striking one. We follow one devotee of Krishna called Akrura, who comes to the cowherd camp to see the god. And here is what he says. Akrura looked at the god lying on his back, basked in his prosperity, was not yet reached his adolescence, and he uttered these words. Here is a god with eyes of white lotus. His most remarkable ornaments are his 2 arms, entitled to kill enemies. He is beautiful. His fingers seem naturally able to take the wheel, and his second hand, upright, wishes to grasp the mace. So while he contemplates the god he came to see, the child, Akrura has a vision of his future form with 4 arms. Supplementary arms are coming when you grow as an adult. This biological model is also very specific, not only because it presupposes that supplementary arms will grow from the body of the deity, but because the increasing in size linked to a growth from a child to a young adult, this growth is seen as a peculiar one, which is paralleled with the growth of a Vedic Vishnu. Here is what is said to Krishna before he was born at Mathura in the Harivamsha. Then he will be only one newborn with cowherd's features, but you will have to grow, O warrior of long arms, like in days of yore you were able of a triple stride. This triple stride is the exploit of Vishnu in the Vedic text. In the Harivamsha, Vishnu becomes a giant to overcome a demonic king called Bali. Vishnu comes to see Bali under the guise of a dwarf and then becomes a giant who strides the world. The Vedic Vishnu is now just one amongst the other aspects of the god. Just like Krishna became one avatar of the Hindu Vishnu, the Vedic Vishnu becomes one avatar of the new Vishnu. And these two are linked one to the other. These two forms of Krishna and the giant entertain a special link in the Harivamsha. Such link may reflect or express that they were the first of all the forms of the Vaishnava law to be represented in the sculpted tradition under a human shape. Here is how the biological model allows for this link. Krishna grows like the dwarf form grown before him. He is born like the Vedic Vishnu was, because Vishnu was the son of Aditi and Kashyapa, and Aditi and Kashyapa are exactly the parents of Krishna. They are reborn as the parents of Krishna in the Harivamsha. These two forms, the one of the Vedic Vishnu and the one of Krishna, are the two human forms of the god in the Mahabharata. In the Harivamsha, these are the two garbhas, the two embryos, then child or dwarf, who undergo a magic growth. And the comparison is in the Harivamsha very explicit between the giant who has grown and the Shishu, the baby Krishna, summoned to grow up Vardayasva, like the striding form Vishnu took in the past, Pura Trivikrame Yata. The iconography of Krishna as one child, which emerges during the Gupta periods, corresponds with the deeds of Krishna described in the Harivamsha. This is the main element that confirms the new status of Krishna, who from now is represented as a child fighting with bare hands, the iconography that was so rare during the Kushana period and used then only to represent the fight against one horse. Krishna has now become a miraculous baby. And to see a link with the carving of the Kushana period, we need to refer to this fight against the horse with only two arms and no attributes. When the iconography of Krishna, the only deity absorbed by a Hindu Vishnu, the only deity who already had a fixed iconography at that time, when this iconography has been borrowed, we need to get another iconography for Krishna himself, and this is the one of the miraculous baby fighting against different means. When this change of the identity given to the four-armed deity occurs and the forms of a two-armed Krishna appear, the Govardhana episode turns up being one crucial deed. In the Harivamsha, in fact, two episodes are more important than others, and these are also two episodes that are more represented than all the other ones in the Gupta territory. These two episodes are the fight against the king of the gods of Vedic origin, Indra. The fight against the giant snake Kalia, who owns the Yamuna, allows for renewing the alliance with the snake deities that was previously embodied in the elder brother of Krishna, represented as one snake deity, and which is from now represented in the creative aspect of Vishnu, to whom the snake god provides a couch. But the most important of all battles won by Krishna is really the Govardhana episode. There, Krishna fights with Indra and he renews the Vedic alliance of Vishnu and Indra. But now, Krishna is the real Lord and not Indra. In this episode, Krishna undergoes a magic growth and he becomes a giant, like one new manifestation of the Vedic Vishnu. We have to say that the story goes as follows. There is one festival devoted to Indra, and Krishna instructs the cowherds to worship not Indra, but the cows and the mountain. Indra is furious, and then he sends a terrific storm to the cowherd camp, and a flood, which is born from torrential rains, threatens to engulf the cowherds and their animals. Then Krishna takes the Govardhana mountain itself. He uprooted this mountain and he used it as a giant umbrella to protect the animals and the whole camp from Indra's fury. The magic growth exhibited by Krishna in this episode is the key for the new relation between Krishna and Vishnu. Here is a new Vedic Vishnu, the new Krishna, who is a Vedic giant, the Vedic boar, and a child. This is a tale of power over territory and kinship, This is a tale of a link between heaven and earth. This is a tale of creation. This episode is represented all over the Gupta territory as if to symbolize the power of the god who emerges then. But it is also the main episode represented in the south of India when images of Krishna and Vishnu began being done there. The way the Govardhana episode itself is represented in the southern Mahabalipuram in the today Tamil Nadu underlines the value of territoriality and power that this story symbolizes. Here you see on the left a representation of Krishna as the one who lifts the Govardhana mountain from the Gupta territory, and on the right the same myth illustrated on one southern temple of the 8th century in southern India. The myth is represented in fact in a pan-Indian context. Where does this importance comes from? In the text, when Krishna lifts the mountains, he performs a creative act. By lifting the mountain out of the water, he acts like the demiurge, the boar manifestation, who creates the earth by making it emerge on the ocean of origins. He is therefore a protector, a new god, and a creative deity. On all these aspects, the South Indian artists have played when they represented the myth at the by carving a Krishna lifting the Mount Govardhana, here you see him, directly into a rocky hill that represents a mountain. The mountain of the Govardhana, there is one in the area of Mathura where the original myth was located, but when it is carved in Mahabalipuram, in the southern Tamil Nadu, they take another mountain and they have carved the god directly into this mountain to show how he lifted it. At Mahabalipuram, indeed, the sculptors they have used landscape elements, a rocky hill and also the nearby sea to show, to represent, to express the whole mythical dimensions of the episode and ground it in this site. Here you see the hills that Krishna lifts and an engraving. There is the top of the mountain. You see the sea there, and one engraving of the Daniels that was done in the 18th century. Here you see the whole carving of Krishna lifting the Mount Govardhana. It is not exactly a cave because one veranda has been added in front of it later, probably 16th or 17th century. And this veranda does not allow for clearly saying how the rainwater, which was also part of the stage, is used. But in fact, there was one cistern at the top of the hill, and water was coming down on the top of the relief, while rainwater was coming from the monsoon, when the monsoon season was coming. And then it can be said that sacred geography, originally located in northern India, has been translated into a new region. Elements of landscape are used to ground the myth in the southern area. The same process has been used to implant the myth in Cambodia, but in an even more dramatic way on the Phnom Dah Hills. Here you see 3 pre-Angkorian Krishna Govardhana of Cambodia and the Phnom Dah Hill at the background. The statues that were placed on this hill were part of a larger stage where the myth was reenacted. At the site of the Phnom Dah, like at Mahabalipuram, the myth of the Govardhana has been featured with the landscape. The staging of the myth used landscape elements such as the mountain, the water of the river, and the rain. At the time of the monsoon, the hill rises above the surrounding water, like Mount Govardhana ready to be engulfed by the flood caused by the torrential rains unleashed by Indra. Then it represents the earth emerging from the waters that the boar of manifestation of Vishnu has created. On this slide, I've just gathered several representations of the Govardhana Dara in India itself to show the iconographical variants of the representations. I am inclined to see, I have to say, They are inclined to see the south of India as a more plausible source for the iconography of the pre-Angkorian Krishna because of the use of landscape elements, which is common to the site of Mahabalipuram and of the Namda. But we cannot be sure, of course. And other origins for this iconography of the pre-Angkorian Cambodia, other sources than the south are also plausible. You will see how the position in itself is rather similar. And now, by way of a conclusion, I would say that after a Kushana period when many experiments were made to represent what cannot be seen by human eye, the Gupta age appears a crucial period for the formation of Vaishnava deities. A new dimension is given to a four-armed deity, the god of the Mahabharata, of whom possibilities are developed up to give him the appearance of a supreme deity who is the source of diverse forms he dominates. New forms, new dimensions appear on a territory whose creativity is enhanced. The spread of the iconography of Vishnu, not only in a pan-Indian territory, but all over Southeast Asia, calls for the concept of a ritual space in which people choose to promote a same model found in replica all over one territory. The segmentary state, familiar to those studying medieval South India, comes to mind. The emerging model of Vishnu as a sovereign god whose forms are multiple and found in all his provinces seems to illustrate the divine facet of what could also have been a political model. If merchants have been recognized, acknowledged as playing a key role in the diffusion of Hinduism and of its iconography, the latter had to meet the needs of the kings. The kings like to be depicted as protectors of a land where they control the power of water and of which they are ready to defend against all attacks, including the ones of older kings. Krishna, as this form of Vishnu who takes a human shape, is more than other forms of the god appropriate for illustrating the link between kings and gods, and among the forms Krishna takes, the one of the Govardhana Dara, the one who lifts the Govardhana mountain, creating a land, protecting it under a giant shape, that is one replica of the Vedic Vishnu in the Vedas. This form was the most represented. And I thank you for your attention.
Hello there. Hello, Charlotte. That was a wonderful lecture. I got so much out of it. Again, I could listen to it over and over again. It is full of so much important information, and it's so critical, I think, that you conveyed to everybody the complexity of the relationship between Vishnu and Krishna, that it's not just this simple God and human avatar relationship. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different ages, sometimes they're quite different, and so I think you've brilliantly conveyed all of these nuances.
Thank you, Sonia. Yes, it's a very complex issue, frankly. But from the point of view of images, Krishna was first, but okay, it's a chronology. And anyway, Krishna and Vishnu. Krishna is always the most important avatars of Vishnu. He remains it.
So we have some questions from our audience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The first one actually is, what is the significance of the conch shell and the discus?
Yeah, so these two important attributes of strange objects of Vishnu and Krishna, of course. So I start with the conch. So the conch, the main difficulty to answer the question is that you have different levels of meaning. Thus, the conch is used in the Mahabharata as Krishna and other warriors, they can blow in the conch to call, it's a kind of call of war. We are going to fight, and then you call your the warriors who are on the same side than you. And in the text, it's also commented that this conch, this shell, is coming from the sea. It comes from the sea, and then it's a symbol of treasures, of richness. So it's a warrior instrument, but it's also a symbol of riches, and that's it mainly. For the discus is of course a symbol of the sun itself, of the light of the sun, of the radiating glow of the god, and it was used in the same time in Buddhism. In Buddhism, the discus is an image of the way Buddha starts to speak about the Dharma, about what you have to do on Earth, and if you want to be rewarded with the end of your, if you want to cut the rebirth cycle. And then so the discus can be understood in very different ways, but from a visual point of view, it was an allusion to both Buddhism in a way, and to the symbolism of the sun, of the light of the sun. And it's also a third thing in the text. It is it's a weapon for Krishna, and Krishna takes his discus and he kills the enemy in whirling this discus, and it's a discus that can cut the heads of the enemies.
Okay, next question. Am I right that in the case of Govardhana, we sandals or boots on Vishnu's feet? This reminds a bit of bodhisattvas. Is this typical of Cambodia, or do we find it in India?
Govardhana, the Govardhana of Cambodia. I'm not sure that it's not okay.
Do we ever see any boots on Krishna or sandals?
I don't see sandals or boots on the Govardhana that at least the one I know. So maybe it's typical. For Cambodia. And if you get bodhisattvas in Cambodia, on which you have boots depicted, but in India itself, no. Boots in India are used for but you don't design boots for Vishnu or for Krishna, or maybe Sonia,
Vishnu.
So you have time in which you want to situate the question. So in the Mahabharata, for instance, you have several forms of the supreme deity who is Krishna. Several forms are given, but the two main forms are Krishna and his elder brother. But then in later passages of the Mahabharata, because the Mahabharata has been composed for centuries, so in later passages you also get mentions of the boar form and the Parivamsha. These manifestations of the deity are called Pradubhavas, and then in the Puranas they are called avatars. And once they are called avatars in the text, full lists are given of these avatars, and these lists they vary from one text to the other. But let's say that you always, mainly the most often encountered one would be Trivikrama. So this Vedic Vishnu who grows would be the lion form, would be the boar form, the turtle, the fish, Rama, who is a hero of the Ramayana, another Rama called Parashurama, Rama with an X, but it really varies. And to give you a sample, how much it varies. If you are in the south of India, so first in the south of India you get the very first known list of the avatars of Vishnu in epigraphy. And it can include Buddha himself. And in the south, in the texts, but not in epigraphy, literary text, it includes a bird, a swan, a hamsa. And the Hamsa as an avatar of Vishnu is not known in the north, in northern texts, in the Sanskrit Puranas, for instance, but it appears in the Tamil text, where you want to see it with the question, but you have many avatars, many forms of Vishnu, different from periods and areas.
Perfect summation. So actually, I have a question for you, Charlotte. So following your biological model, which I think is so interesting, do you think maybe at Phnom Da itself, we see Krishna growing up? So there are the two Krishnas, one with the child's hairstyle and then the second Krishna with the adult hairstyle. Those are both lifting Mount Govardhana. But then at the top of the mountain above the caves, but facing in the same direction, is the great Vishnu with 8 arms. Could that Vishnu be the adult Krishna who has gained multiple arms and grown in size?
Mm-hmm. The thing is, as you know, I'm less familiar with Cambodia than you are. So this 8-armed Vishnu, he looks like he's more like the 8-armed form. I would say you would have Krishna with two arms, and you get the adult form with 4 arms. But if you have an 8-armed form, it's even above the usual ordinary Vishnu form. It's more like it can be either a Vedic one, this Trivikrama aspect, or this Vishvarupa aspect, which appears in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavad Gita. So it depends, because I don't know them by heart. What are the objects held by this 8-armed Vishnu?
A baton, and then the antelope skin, the mace, a bottle of water, so a ewer, and then probably a cluster of grasses. It's very unclear because it's very broken. And there's a thunderbolt, and then a pedestal that has a broken object that could be either a conch or a discus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really, it's more like a Vishvarupa form than a Vedic Vishnu. What they wanted to express in having this Krishna Govardhana and this 8-arm form, I'm not sure you can link it directly with the Bhagavad Gita, but maybe they wanted to express that this 8-armed deity was the supreme form for all what was on the hill, Saptamda hill, including
and everything from creation to destruction, and everything in between. So I don't see any more questions coming in from our virtual audience, so I'll say thank you so much, Charlotte, for preparing this incredible presentation and for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and I was very moved also by what you have said at the very beginning about the Dr. Datta, and I thank you for having invited me to give this lecture. And I was, as you know, I was very disappointed. It was not possible to come in person, but I think a virtual lecture is really also a nice thing, and everybody can listen to it, and it will be on the website after all, and that will be so. It's great. It was a great experience for me, and I thank you for all this, and all the ones who have helped me in this big adventure. And thank you very much, all the people who listen to me, who listen to us, and who have come to listen to this. Thank you.